Good evening. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With us, we're doing a second show with three people from Puerto Rico. And I'll have them introduce themselves again. We have Hector Lopez. Olga
Sanabria.
And Daniel Vila. All three of you introduce yourself again.
Okay, my name is Hector Lopez. I'm from Ponce, Puerto Rico. I've been in the United States since 1956. I came here when I was 14, and I'm almost 70. And I participated in Puerto Rican politics in the United States more than in Puerto Rico. I've also been a volunteer in the schools where I live. I've also been participating in the conservation of land in New Canaan, and I've been involved I circulated a petition against Indian Point, also a petition for Vieques, so that's about it.
And we discussed that in the first time you were on, almost 2 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Olga Sanabria.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. I am Puerto Rican, as you mentioned. I was born in Puerto Rico, and I've been in this country since my parents migrated in the 50s. And I've been involved for a very long time in Puerto Rican issues in the United States and also in the Puerto Rican decolonization, pro-independence, political status issue.
Daniel Vila.
And thank you, David, again for having us. And yeah, I was born in Puerto Rico, and my parents, my two brothers came here in 1954, in the last century. And also in New York City, I am very active with the Cisapacari Labor Committee, where we do a lot of work against wage theft, and also a member of the International Migrants Alliance.
Now, we broke off on the last show talking about corporate influence, not just in Puerto Rico, but how it relates to corporate influence in the 50 states of the United States. And Walmart and some of the other large companies which dominate the landscape. And you had mentioned when you were on before, 2 years ago, that those large big box stores are taking hold in Puerto Rico the same way that they're taking hold in America. And what are they doing are they doing the same thing to mom and pop stores there that they're doing here?
Well, you know, David, I came to New York City in 1954, but in 1974 I returned to Puerto Rico, and I lived there for over 20 years. And when I arrived in Las Piedras, Puerto Rico, which is my hometown, it was a very vibrant town. A lot of energy, banks, small banks. The post office was in the middle of town, a beautiful plaza, and so on and so forth. But during a period of less than 25 years, actually less than 20 years, what happened is that all these United States megastores and also the fast food chains, U.S. banks, and so on and so forth, which is a very natural process for them, which is expand. They've pretty much taken over Puerto Rico completely. The small, mom and pop restaurant or candy store, whatever, even the so-called bodegas or grocery stores, they're pretty much disappearing. And what you have more and more are these fast food shops, and it's interesting because you would figure that people would have been born in Puerto Rico would love to eat home cooking or whatever, be with the family at dinner. But no, what happens is that I guess through a process of changing of culture, as U.S. culture imposes itself on Puerto Rico, for example, people learn or they feel that it's better to go eat at the fast food shop, or instead of going to the community store, going to the shopping mall, for example. And of course, we all know the advantages of that, air conditioning, music, and so on and so forth, bright lights. But definitely, one of the huge impacts with U.S. colonization, U.S. occupation of Puerto Rico has had the objective of is to do that, is pretty much to import U.S. capital and make more profits for these, Walmart, Kmart type of stores. In the process, of course, what you have is a working class which has been severely impoverished. For example, in the early 1970s, in the mid-1970s, I worked at a department store for many years. At that time, it was a full-time job. Today, the same U.S. department store, for example, has all part-time work. I also worked at a factory, for example, making pharmaceutical products. At that time, it was a full-time job with, even though it was a lousy salary, but at least you had a medical plan and you had permanence. Today, all those factory jobs, for example, in the same factory, which is still in Las Piedras, they're privatized now. You have these temporary agencies, U.S.-owned in many cases, Puerto Rican-owned in other cases, but which they come in and they send labor to the factory, and so those jobs, which were fairly good jobs, even though they were bad salary, but even those fairly decent jobs have disappeared. So what you've had is a process of where more and more of the wealth disappears in Puerto Rico, and more of it gets transferred over to the U.S.
So now what's happened, what we see worldwide, in a lot of countries, France is a good example, has fought the invasion of these large corporations and mega stores. They've fought this idea of labor being cut back and splintered and labor unions being pretty much decimated. What does France have that the 50 American states and Puerto Rico don't have? What are we missing here? What are we missing that France has accomplished?
Mm-hmm. I think, first of all, that we have to part from the premise that Puerto Rico has even less than the 50 states. Puerto Rico does not have Puerto Rico does not have its own labor laws. Puerto Rico does not control migration into the country. So these are two factors that are really important, because if Puerto Rico were to control that, we might have better working conditions. Puerto Rico cannot engage in as compared to other independent Latin American, Caribbean countries and other countries internationally, independent countries. Puerto Rico cannot engage in commerce with countries other than the United States. So Puerto Rico is actually a captive market of United States goods. In fact, Puerto Rico is the 5th largest market for United States goods in the world. So these are all aspects of United States control over Puerto Rico that affect working conditions and living conditions in Puerto Rico, and also the capacity to organize unions. I also wanted to mention that when we talk about the Puerto Rico as a market for United States goods, that's where you have these mega stores establishing themselves. Puerto Rico generates $35 billion in profits for the United States on a yearly basis. And that's $35 billion that return to the United States predominantly. In other words, they're not reinvested in Puerto Rico into the Puerto Rican economy. So it just basically regenerates the dependence of the Puerto Rican people. The other thing is that Puerto Rico does not have its own maritime law. It's the United States maritime laws that apply in Puerto Rico. And that seriously increases the price of consumer goods in Puerto Rico. One last thing that I wanted to mention about the mega stores in Puerto Rico is that mega stores such as Walmart, Kmart, and all the rest of them, Costco, Sam's, they're mainly located in huge mega malls. So what you have in Puerto Rico at the present time is you have land that could easily be used, very fertile land, that could easily be used to develop agriculture in Puerto Rico and decrease the dependence of Puerto Rico on United States food products. You have those lands made unusable for agriculture anytime in the future, because what you have is huge construction in those lands and huge parking lots in those lands, and you have dozens and dozens, and the more time passes, the more you have them. Even in the mountain towns, you have huge malls, and it's a terrible problem environmentally also, because it also involves deforesting, so it also affects the environment. It affects the future economic situation of Puerto Rico under independence, because you're actually eliminating land that could be cultivated for agriculture. So that's another implication of the situation that Daniel was also talking about regarding the malls and the megastores in Puerto Rico, besides the fact of how they affect the workers in Puerto Rico, which these stores are constantly advertised when the project is going about and they're doing this environmental impact study and everything else. They're presented as, oh, this is going to create so many jobs and it's going to do this and do the other. They don't create that many jobs, and the jobs they create are actually part-time jobs, no benefits, no health insurance, very little vacation time, very, very low salaries, very bad working conditions, no unions. And these are not teenagers working part-time to have a car. These are families that have children, they have responsibility, that are working in these stores on a part-time basis.
So
So,
like
it's a
many
terrible,
Americans.
terrible environmental and economic and labor conditions problem that's going on. And it's a very similar problem to the situation in the United States, except that
I was gonna say,
Puerto
yeah.
Rico is captive because it has this overbearing power over it that prevents it from really taking measures for different situations to take place in the country to the benefit of the interests of the people of the country rather than foreign interests.
And it's like you say, David, I'm sorry, it's exactly like you say. I was a labor organizer with the American Postal Workers Union for years.
Yes.
And one thing that we did notice when we go to Denver, to Allentown, to Milwaukee, you would see that the center of those towns are now like deserted, very poor, like running down. And then what you see is on the suburbs, you have these mega malls, which, of course, people out of need more than anything, actually, because they give you no alternative. Is people do go there to shop, and they go back to the middle of the city, but the city is like deserted. And you have the same situation in Puerto Rico, town after town after town. Practically every town, even in the capital, San Juan, you have that situation. And, of course, it's exactly the same thing as Americans living here in small towns are suffering.
That giant sucking sound of profits being taken out.
Oh, yes.
People in the 50 states have the same complaint about profits being generated in America and being sucked away and jobs sucked away by these large corporations. They suck the profits out of America. The case of Walmart, where a lot of what's generated, a lot of what we spend in Walmart goes to China, and a lot of it goes to Walmart. Who knows where Walmart is nowadays? I guess they used to be in Arkansas, but who knows where they are at this point. But it sounds like the same thing that we complain about here in the 50 states, other countries doing that to us. America's doing the same thing to Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
taking
I
the
might
profit
add-
out.
I might add that in the case of Puerto Rico, we need to look at options and the status options and the status debate, the colonial status debate, is intimately related to these problems. Because if you think about it, right now there are certain processes taking place in Latin America and the Caribbean where different countries are establishing trade blocks and integration blocks to pool resources and to benefit their countries. Puerto Rico is being left out of that process that's taking place in Latin America in many levels. And we're being left out because we're a colony of the United States and we don't have the right. We're prevented by U.S. power in Puerto Rico, by U.S. domination over Puerto Rico, from trading bilaterally with other countries and also from becoming a part of these regional blocs. We're also prevented from being a part of international organizations, such as the United Nations, such as UNESCO, such as many, many other organisms, which of course we know that all these international organisms have tremendous contradictions and problems, but there is a benefit to being in those organizations and as an independent country. So I think that we need to integrate the situation we're talking about economically and the colonial status of Puerto Rico and independence being an option to address some of these problems. And we also need to see the common denominators between people in the United States and the situations that people in Puerto Rico are going through, but knowing that the options for Puerto Rico are in the direction of independence and addressing the colonial issue.
Do the people of Puerto Rico have any representation in Washington?
Well, you have one pathetic representative who is a person who has no vote. And it used to be that he could only speak if another member of the House of Representatives could call on him. But I think there was a year ago, there was a new imposition upon that colonial representative where he could not even speak anymore. So he's just there to listen to what is decided upon Puerto Rico. Of course, it's called a resident commissioner, and it's a big hoopla is made about this in Puerto Rico about the fact that there is a representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. But it's a really shameful position for anybody to be representing a colony in a place where you have no vote and you have...
so he is unable to actually to even represent the people of Puerto Rico because he has no vote or she has no vote.
And that's why, for example, Brother Hector Lopez brought some information here on some political prisoners, because I think all these shameful situations that are going on in Puerto Rico force many people to decide themselves, to dedicate themselves to be lifelong fighters for Puerto Rican independence and make a great deal of sacrifices. Very often, not even people are political prisoners, as we have here, who have not committed any crime, who have sincerely sat around a table like we're doing now and talked about independence, and then they've been arrested for seditious action of one type or another, or conspiracy, where actually they have not been sentenced for any type of violent act. And we still have several Puerto Rican political prisoners that are doing time.
Hector, if you could explain the political prisoner situation?
The Puerto Rican political prisoners are in prison because of their dedication to the ideal of independence of Puerto Rico. Maybe Olga could add some more to that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think one of the things that we really need to emphasize in this is that Puerto Rico has had the longest held political prisoners in Latin America and even in the world, comparable, for example, to Nelson Mandela. Right now, Oscar Lopez, whose name is on this flyer that you're holding up,
yes.
Oscar Lopez has been in prison for more than 30 years. 30 years. The political prisoner that was incarcerated most recently, Alberto Torres, he also was in prison for 30 years. That's 3 decades.
And he has not been convicted of any violent act.
Comparable to Nelson Mandela. Now here you have again the issue of colonialism, which is what they're fighting against. But it should be known internationally that these political prisoners are at the same level in terms of the years that they have served to Nelson Mandela. Right now, I honor Nelson Mandela because of the years that he served in prison for the cause of
and that was in South Africa for the audience's clarification.
For in his struggle to eliminate apartheid in South Africa. But I can't help but notice that political prisoners in Puerto Rico have served the same amount of time, but they're not extended the honor and the respect that Nelson Mandela is. And of course, they haven't played the role as incarcerated political prisoners that Nelson Mandela played after he was released. Obviously, they can't do that because they're still in prison. But it should be noted that it's 30 years.
So he's been in there since Ronald Reagan became president.
Yes.
That goes back quite a ways. And without being convicted of a major crime?
His only crime was, what they actually convicted him is supposedly conspiring to overthrow the government of the United States in Puerto Rico.
Really?
Which conspiring is sitting around a table. I mean, they did not accuse him of killing anybody, of putting a bomb, of robbing a bank. He was not accused of that. He was accused of simply sitting around and conspiring to overthrow the United States government of Puerto Rico, which means, supporting the independence of Puerto Rico. But, I'd like to, we may be running out of time, and I would like to emphasize something, David, because I know very often people feel, why are so many Puerto Ricans coming here, so many Mexicans coming here, so many Salvadorans, and so on and so forth. And in the case of Puerto Ricans, we are migrants also. Puerto Ricans are migrants because our country is occupied. As a result, we're forced to come here just like Mexicans or people from Russia looking for work is the reason why we're here. And in my case, that is specifically the case also. In Puerto Rico, I could only get a job as a security guard making $7 an hour, and I was starving, and I had to come back to the United States and get a better paying job. Now, we have to realize, though, that when people come and migrate to this country, people do it out of necessity, not because people want to leave their homes, want to leave their families, want to leave their loved ones and the culture that they love. And very often, unfortunately, David, it is the policies of these big corporations, these mega stores, which slash and burn, destroy our economies totally. The agricultural lands, as Olga was pointing out before, they're covered over with cement. mega stores substitute simple shops, which once gave most of the jobs to the community.
And we know that small businesses create jobs everywhere.
And those are the ones.
Likewise, in the United States, small businesces create 70% of the jobs in America.
And you have dignity, and a sense of dignity when you're living in your own community in a small store or whatever it is, or a factory of your own community or of your own country. There's a different sense of pride. And so we're forced to come here and migrants and so on and so forth. So just for those brothers and sisters, for example, that feel that the United States is being invaded by too many outsiders, ask your congressmen, your senators, these big mega corporations to please stop destroying our countries, because the reason why people come here over and over again in each time greater waves is because of these policies imposed on our countries. All we want is for these countries, these companies, to stop their imperial domination of our economies and let us breathe, let us have our own economies, and people will stop coming to this country.
Now, I would imagine that would resonate with people, say, from Cuba, who left Cuba because of a dictatorial regime there, run by Fidel Castro, and they always talk about certainly wanting to go home because they're one or two generations removed from Cuba. But it sounds like very much likewise, a lot of Puerto Ricans would like to go back and resettle and be back where they've been separated by maybe one or two generations. In Puerto Rico, be by the colonization of not a communist dictator, but by a corporate dictator in a sense.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think it needs to be clarified that in recent years, the Cuban government has made more flexible the possibility of Cubans returning. Mm-hmm. And that's a trend right now, that Cubans can return, and Cubans can also travel out of Cuba. So that's something that I think really needs to be clarified. The other thing is that it's interesting that in the case of Puerto Rico, the migration to the United States, the population of Puerto Ricans in the United States, because of the nature of the migration, because Puerto Ricans are citizens and there are no barriers, a visa, work permit, papers, the population of Puerto Ricans in the United States is continually renewed. So that you don't have, well, there was a migration, they settled, they assimilated, that's it. But the migration is constantly
so
being renewed.
So it's a circular pattern.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm.
It's also a circular pattern in that there are also many Puerto Ricans that go back. Mm-hmm. In the last 20 years, more than 500,000 Puerto Ricans have come to the United States. And that's a huge, huge population. And right now, as a result of the crisis in Puerto Rico, the crisis in the United States is reflected manyfold in Puerto Rico because of the colonial status and because of the lack of options. So right now, migration is on the rise once again, even though there is also return migration. So it's a very interesting situation in terms of what that relationship does to the Puerto Rican population and the characteristics of the Puerto Rican population. The other thing that I would like to mention about this migration is that Puerto Ricans in the United States historically have always had, besides the struggle for better conditions and institutions that favor those better conditions in the United States, Puerto Ricans in the United States have always manifested the struggle for independence. There have always been in the United States expressions of the movement for independence in Puerto Rico. It's an issue that just does not go away because it's part of the reality, the unresolved reality of Puerto Rico. And that's also something that needs to be said, I believe, when we talk about Puerto Ricans in the United States.
Well, even in Hawaii, Puerto Ricans in Hawaii that have been there for generations express feelings for the independence of Puerto Rico. I have a record, a CD, where the Puerto Ricans in Hawaii are expressing their feelings for Puerto Rico and for independence. So wherever Puerto Ricans are, there's always Puerto Ricans who think about Puerto Rico's national rights.
Free trade agreements, international free trade agreements, particularly NAFTA, had a devastating effect on Mexican corn farmers. Have there been any special repercussions from these international free trade agreements on on Puerto Rico?
Well, in Puerto Rico, actually, there were no free trade agreements in the sense that actually U.S. policy immediately made Puerto Rico a captive economy or part of its national economy. But still, although, for example, one of the first things they did when the United States corporations got there is to destroy the existence of Puerto Rican agriculture. So a country, although colonized before the U.S. invasion by Spain, was able to pretty much grow its own food and was dependent upon its own agricultural workers. With the U.S. imposition of its economic model of advanced capitalism, Puerto Rico now is totally dependent upon U.S. products being bought in, otherwise Puerto Ricans will starve. But it's interesting because now with NAFTA and all these free trade agreements throughout Latin America, what happens is that even cheaper products, and very often of even a lower quality, are coming in from throughout Latin America. And also, incredibly, also from China. Most of the clothing that people wear in Puerto Rico is made in China, just like in the U.S. also. So what you've had is these trade agreements. The economy in Puerto Rico was colonized and dominated by the U.S. anyway, but these trade agreements destroy our economy even more.
That's such a huge change from even 50 years ago, when I'm sure the same way that most American clothing was made in the United States, probably most clothing in Puerto Rico was made in Puerto Rico.
Well,
and now it's all from China or other countries where labor is cheap and environmental laws and rules are non-existent.
When I had moved to Las Piedras back in '74, as I was talking before, one of the main job sectors of the economy was sewing, was textile, for example, not only Las Piedras.
We're going to have to break off right there. We've run out of time. We'll have you back very soon for more discussions. This is Progressive Soup. David Stevenson, Hector Lopez, Olga Sanabria.
Thank you, David.
And Daniel Vila.
Thank you
very much.
Thank
Good evening.
you.